Well, welcome back to the Curragh. I'm joined by Nick O'Toole and, of course, author Sean McGee. This is the Lester Piggott exhibition that takes place here over the both days of the Guineas weekend. And I must admit, lads, I'm like a big child in here this afternoon. It's brilliant to see some of the memorabilia. And Nick, you've put a lot of work into organising this exhibition.
Well, a lot of the memorabilia came from Lester himself. He was anxious, actually, that some of the memorabilia would be housed here for the future when the museum comes aboard in a couple of years' time. Now, the fascinating thing about Lester is that he collected scrap albums and photographic albums from the word go. So he had a chronological sort of sequence to his whole life. When he rode his first winner at 12 years of age, right through to when he was champion apprentice at 15, rode his first classic winner at 18 years of age. And he was actually a boy wonder. And he actually had to ride over hurdles in the earlier part of his career because he couldn't make the weight. But for a man of 5'8", he was actually stone and a half under his natural weight for most of his natural life. And that's what makes him, in my opinion, not so much even a legend. We all know he's a legend, but he's a sporting icon. We're just not going to see the likes of Lester again. In fact, I would think it's a virtual impossibility.
And Sean, he ran the sport basically. I don't think any other jockey will ever have the same power as Lester had. He organised where horses ran in each races, and he just unbelievable power. He ran flat racing, really.
Yeah, pretty well he did, yes. I mean, one of the many extraordinary things about him was how early he became a household name beyond racing. Even in the very early 50s, before he won his first Derby on Never Say Die in 54, he was known as a wonder, boy wonder, as Nick has said. And thereafter, I mean, a lot to do with his personality. I think people couldn't quite fathom him out, and you know, he didn't flying dismount. He couldn't. What's that? I mean, the idea of Lester doing such a thing was just sort of completely alien. He was there to ride the horses. He rode them, and he didn't often. Sometimes he did, but he didn't often show a great whoop of delight as he came in. And I think this intrigued people, as well as being people were awestruck by the way he rode. You watch Roberto win the Derby, you watch the Minstrel win the Derby, or best of all, Royal Academy, right at the end of his second coming, as we would call it. He was just riveting, because you didn't know what made this man tick, and what, as Nick said, a stone and a half off his natural body weight, and this sort of thing, the determination, the sheer willpower, which is alien to most of us, and certainly to me.
Well, we're going to start off here, and this is the earlier years. And if you'd like to take us through, lads, what we have here, Nick, we'll start off with you.
Yes, well, basically, we got the boy wonder. You know, he rode his first winner at 12 years of age. Now, all these black and white photographs that you see here, they're actually Lester's own personal photographs. And what he did was, he actually signed the race. He signed the photograph of where the race meeting was and who he was riding against. And he did this for most of his childhood and into his adult life. What amazes me is, if you see this particular one here, when he went riding over hurdles, no skull cap, and he's riding very, very long, and they're very rare photographs. In fact, he rode 20 winners over hurdles out of 59 mounts. But he managed to control the weight down, and he just applied himself, basically, to ride at 8 stone 6. He just made up his mind, this is what I want to do. Now, Lester, all he wanted to do was ride winners. It didn't matter if it was a 1.5 mile handicap in Brighton or Group 1 at Epsom. Now, as you see, we're doing this chronologically, so we have him actually here as the boy wonder. And this particular photograph of him here, I think that's one of my favourite photographs. And that's why the public just adored him, because they knew he could deliver, because he just wanted to win every single time. And this is what makes him a once-off. Now, he had a slight hearing impairment. He was born with a slight hearing impairment. But when it came to booking rides, he had no problem on the telephone, I can assure you.
He could hear what he wanted to hear.
He could hear what he wanted to hear. Of course, there was no agents then. But he just had this, he could ring up an owner and convince him within 2 minutes to give him the ride. because of his confidence. He could just put this confidence across to the owner. I am the man to ride this horse for you. So he's no problem jocking other lads off, you know, because that was his makeup.
And Sean, it's amazing in the early years, we see in 1949, he's riding so long, but that was the style back then, wasn't it?
It was, but that picture is remarkable, and for me, it's almost my favourite picture in the exhibition. The composure, he was 13 there. The composure, the being at one with the horse is just stunning, really, for a 13-year-old boy. And I love that picture. And you, as Nick said, you get this sort of cherubic Lester before he became this slightly more weather-beaten man. But I love these images of his early life.
And Sean, for a jockey back in those days, he was actually quite tall, wasn't he?
He was, yes. And most jockeys then were tiny. And this, of course, meant that he had to, very early on, have a strict regime of eating very, very, very sparingly. As was often said of him, that his diet was a glass of champagne and a cigar.
And Sean, obviously the old stories you hear about Lester, there was before saunas and so things like that, the plastic bags inside the muck heap. And
yeah, the famous one is, of course, that he would wear a sweatsuit, a plastic onesie, as we would now call it, and done up to right up to the neck. He would then drive to the races. He had one of these big old Austin Cambridge type cars, posh but big, with the heat, even in the height of summer, with the heat turned up full so that he would sweat all the way. And people complained, of course, if they were a passenger going with Lester, if they'd scrounged a lift off him, not an easy thing to do, scrounge a lift off him, they would be a great pool of water by the time they got there. But he was famous for that. Again, it's the rigid self-discipline.
And if we just picture this one, Petite Etoile, what a filly she was. And what a quote from Lester, the best filly I ever rode, Petite Etoile.
Yeah, when you think of some of the fillies he would have ridden, that's a hell of a compliment. She was a remarkable horse. He missed the ride when she won the 1,000 guineas because he chose another horse trained by Noel Merlis. He then won the Oaks on her and all sorts of other big races, and she kept going till she was 5. So she was around a good bit, which was fairly unusual in those days. For a horse of her quality, and he just loved her, and it's a wonderful image of concentration of both of them really in that picture.
And Nick, there's one of the famous cigar in Lester's mouth, in the sporting life.
Well, of course, if we do without food for a day, we're complaining about it for a month. So this man did it for most of his adult life, and 3 cigars, 4 cigars a day, and champagne, and that's what Lester lived on. He had complete and utter discipline. Had to be done. And of course we have here, this is the first classic winner for the Queen. And Curragh back in the late 50s. And he rode quite a bit for the Queen over the years. But that's a magnificent shot of him there, just coming back in after winning. It's the real Lester, you know, the confidence, the determination. And of course we go on here then and we have his 2 other Derby winners, which are Capello and St. Paddy, and they were for the famous Victor Sassoon, who was the Robert Sangster of his day. And Lester, of course, was only in his early 20s when he rode these winners. Now, his first winner was Never Say Die at 18. But his association began with Vincent O'Brien. People think it was actually back in the late 70s, but it wasn't. It was actually back in 1958. And he rode Gladness, that great filly. She won the Ascot Gold Cup for Lester and Vincent, and of course the Goodwood Cup, and then went on to win the Heber.
There's a nice story about when he first met Vincent O'Brien, was at the Cheltenham National Hunt meeting, it was then called, earlier in '58. And they had a conversation, and as they departed, Vincent said to Lester, "Let me know if you ever want to ride in the Grand National," which would have been, I mean, he won over hurdles, and he schooled his father's horse. His father trained a horse called Ayala, who, of course, Lester schooled over fences and did win the National, but he never actually rode in a steeplechase. But I liked that idea of offering L. Piggott to ride in the Grand National. That would have been something to see, wouldn't it?
It would have been unbelievable. That's where it all really started, wasn't it? Like, obviously, Vincent O'Brien had dominated national hunt racing, Grand National winners. He won everything there was. And for the two of them then to gel together, and it was one of the endearing partnership of flat racing.
Yeah, it was extraordinary, and neither was a terribly talkative man, I think, but there was a sort of spiritual bond between them when you saw them together, especially later on, both towards the end of their careers. You could sense this sort of magnetism between them, and it was very remarkable. And the results, of course, are stunning. I mean, of Leicester's 30 English classic winners, 9 of them were trained by Vincent. And then you had horses like Alleged, who didn't win classics, but he won 2 Arcs. I mean, the record of their partnership is staggering.
And the one that really springs to mind that really brought Vincent and Leicester's partnership together was the saddle that he won in this horse, Saraiva, when he won the Derby.
Yes, it was an amazing turn of foot. The story goes that Sandy Barclay on Connaught thought he'd won the Derby because he was going so well and he was so far clear of the others. And then suddenly Leicester appears as if from out of the clouds and wins. Remarkable horse, Saraiva. Of course, after the Derby, he lost his next 4 races and then came back, won the Champion Stakes and won this remarkable Washington, D.C. International, ridden by Lester, who again waited till the very last minute, put Saraiva's head in front just about 100 yards out, and got an awful lot of stick from the American press, who said that he'd practically got the best horse beaten. And Lester, in that very laconic way of his, said, "I think I knew a bit more about Saraiva than they did." Yes.
Of course, there's Saraiva's colours there on the wall. And we move over to, obviously, the last Triple Crown winner, of course, the great Nijinsky. When you mention Lester Piggott, Nijinsky is the horse. You drive into Ballydial, Nijinsky is the first sculpture you see there at the front gates.
Yes, I mean, he was very, very special all along, Nijinsky. He, wonderful looking horse, had a terrific presence, very, very temperamental. But of course, with Vincent, he had somebody who knew how to get the best out of a high-spirited horse like that. A horse, the end of his career was rather on a downbeat, which is sad. He was just beaten in the Arc and then beaten in the Champion Stakes. But I think people would, if there's one horse associated with Lester Piggott, the purists might go for Saraiva, but those ruled by the heart, shall we say, would go for Nijinsky. He was just not a horse like him.
We haven't seen it since Camelot came close to doing the Triple Crown, but nothing since Nijinsky. Charles Englehart's colours on the wall as well, of course, Nijinsky's owner. And some great pictures here as well, obviously with greats, 3 legends, Joe Mercer, Issam Martin, and of course Lester Piggott as well. And one of them, Steve Cawthon on the right, Lester in the centre, and of course the late legendary Pat Edery on the left. Yes,
I mean, this reminds you what was one of the extraordinary things about Leicester's career was the length of its length. He first rode his first winner in 1948, his last winner in England in 1994, and therefore, of course, he rode against different generations of jockeys. So you've got Scobie Breesley, as you say, Joe Mercer and Yves Saint Martin, his great rival from France, Pat Edery, and then Steve Cawthon, and these guys, plus people like Frankie Dettori, plot a very, very, very long career in Leicester's case. And with this extraordinary sort of hiatus, and then when the comeback, which just stunned everybody. I think he had a great respect for other jockeys as well, and I think he knew he was riding against some pretty good jockeys himself.
Here, if we swing around, is Leicester in Ireland. Obviously himself and the great Vincent O'Brien, the minstrel, Curragh. Walter Swinburne was suspended the year he won the Irish Derby in Curragh, wasn't he?
Yes, Walter had got suspended over a ride at Royal Ascot, and Lester, who had ridden Curragh as a 2-year-old, came in for the ride, and it's the most extraordinary sight, really, in a classic to see a horse winning quite so easily, and he just absolutely cantered in. Now, Peter O'Sullivan's commentary said he's an exercise canter. He was just motionless, Lester, and it was one of the great memories of his career, really, on a horse that had loads in hand. He was just wonderful to behold. A horse like Cigaro, who won the Gold Cup at Ascot 3 years running. Horses like that There was nobody in the world who looked more comfortable on a horse that was completely running within itself.
And if we just swing back here, this is very interesting. His first Irish Derby winner, if we just see the old sport life, of course, was Meadowcourt, trained by the late great Darky Prendergast, and of course his son Kevin Prendergast, 83 years of age, is supplying one of the favourites for the Irish 2000 Guineas here today in Outad.
Yes, one of the great Irish racing dynasties, of course. And as you say, his first, Leicester's first Irish Derby winner, and famous, almost as famous for the turn of foot which Meadowcourt showed that day, was Bing Crosby, the co-owner, bursting into a rendition of When Irish Eyes Are Smiling on the winner's podium. Those were the days when you had owners who'd sing.
We could do with a couple of more Bing Crosbys in the game. Comanche Run, of course, owned by his great friend, the late Ivan Allen, as well. And wasn't that Leicester's final classic winner before he retired for the first time?
There was one more, I think. I think Comanche Run was the 28th, and then Shadid was the 29th, and then Rodrigo and during the comeback was the 30th. But a very, very fine horse, Comanche Run. And if you remember, his St Leger was Leicester having a half-length lead or a length lead all the way up the Doncaster Straight, and just keeping the others at bay. He won narrowly, but he won decisively. He's a terrific horse, Comanche Run. I don't think people quite remember just how good he was, as is the case with this fellow here, Alleged. He won 2 Arcs, trained by Vincent O'Brien, ridden by Leicester. An absolutely wonderful horse. Not many horses have ever won 2 Prix de l'Arc de Triomphe, and he was sensational both times. He didn't win classics, but he developed later and left a big mark on racing.
We see up here, if we see this picture, how about take out Leicester, 3 great legends in their own right. The late Jim Joel, of course, was a massive owner breeder in England, and of course the legendary, again, the late great Sir Henry Cecil in the middle of the picture.
Yes, Henry Cecil, of course, is one of those trainers who's always associated with Leicester. Jim Joel, he won 1,000 Guineas for and plenty of other big races. Wonderful man. And I think Leicester respected people like Jim Joel very much indeed. He was absolutely steeped in the history of the flat racing and indeed jumping. Of course, he won the Grand National, Jim Joel.
And if we move down here, we'll bring Nick back in as well. And this was, I think this is a very poignant picture of Vincent leading back in Leicester. Was it on College Chapel? Yeah. Their final Royal Ascot success together.
That's right, for both of them, for Lester and Vincent. Very, very seldom Vincent led in a winner. He done it with Nijinsky back in 1970 in the King George. But to me, the greatest ride probably Leicester ever gave a horse was on Royal Academy. For a simple reason, the man was only literally 10 days out of retirement. And he came to the Curragh to ride 4 for Vincent, just to get himself race fit. Now, he came back riding in England just a week before that and rode a winner called Nicholas, trained by
Susan Piggott.
Susan, correct. But what, to me, makes it the greatest ride of all time, he's 54, he's back 10 days, comes to Curragh on a Tuesday, rides 4 horses for Vincent and wins on the 4 of them. John Reid couldn't ride Academy in the Breeders' Cup. He was injured. And Leicester got the ride. He literally was in the stalls first, fell asleep in the stalls. So when the gates open, he's literally out of the stalls last. But through Leicester, never panicked, got the horse into a rhythm. Round the home turn, 4.5 from home, he's only 4 behind him. But he comes with this unmerciful run on the outside and gets up to win a neck. It was the richest race in the world at the time. I mean, this man is 54. And he does that. He does what a jockey in his prime in his 30s would do. And to me, that to me was Leicester's greatest ride.
I remember pleading with Mum and Dad at home. I was in school in Kildare Town, and when he came back, it was a Tuesday. I think it was a wet Tuesday here at the Curragh. I was 11 years of age. I begged and pleaded with him to let me off school to come up and see Leicester. And I remember the crowd that was here at the Curragh for a midweek meeting. It was just that was the man. Everybody loved him, wasn't it? We all wanted to be here. Kids, I was 10 or 11 years of age at the time, wanted to be here to see the great man make his comeback.
That's right, and the gates actually trebled that day, the amount of people that turned up on a wet Tuesday afternoon. But he never lost any of his pious or his style. Like, he won on the four of them, and as I say, a few days later to win the Breeders' Cup. Unbelievable.
Fantastic. And we'll just have a look at obviously his daughter Tracy and a couple of these and all, and Piggott is the family man, and of course, you know, some great shots here again, some great footage of and pictures, memorabilia of Lester.
Yeah, that's right. And, you know, Lester wouldn't have done it without his family, and he appreciates that. And actually, Tracy rode a winner on Leopardstown there in 1988 for
Kevin Prendergast.
That's right, and Hamden Malmactoom's colours. And of course, Lester's son Jamie, you see him riding here in his first race. And also over to the left, there's a very young Jamie. He's only about, I think he's only about 3 there. But Lester, look, he looks very content there in his retirement for the first time. He went training for 5 years. And trained, of course, we have his Royal Ascot winner there. Sean, just what's the name of his Royal Ascot winner, just in case you for the minute?
Cutting Blade.
Cutting Blade.
Won the Coventry Stakes, ridden by Cashaz Mooson there. Yeah, it's not bad having a Royal Ascot winner in your first year's training. And he'd built the yard in Eve Lodge, the yard in Newmarket where he trained from. And the remarkable moment, really, because not many trainers, not many jockeys easily make the transition to being a trainer. Of course, we don't know how Lester would have done because his training career was interrupted, but then he came back to the saddle riding. So, but he certainly started jolly well.
Sean, Nick, it's a credit to you. Fantastic memorabilia. As I said, I'm like a big child in here this afternoon. And it's wonderful, wonderful to see it because, as you said, and rightly so, he's not just a legend, he's an icon of the sport.
Yeah, thanks very much. And I'd just like to pay tribute to Coolmore Stud as well. They supplied a lot of the memorabilia for this exhibition.
Many thanks.
Thanks a lot. Thank you.